Hi, friends. It's Sarah, and this is an episode I'm calling Distance and Rigidity or Rigid Judgy. I'm going to rewrite that name. But anyway, this is for when you are in a relationship that has grown distant or rigid. In other words, there's just no more grease to the wheels and it just feels kind of like dry kindling all the time. The UN of love is another thing I call it, meaning like people are being really distant so that there's no explosions, but it's all transactional and there's no warmth and closeness. If you are in a relationship like that, I am guessing that your partner is um, there's a lot of like semantics debates. I feel like oftentimes in relationships like that, somebody feels like their partner is critical of them, overly judgmental, a lot of conversations about conversations. And um, instead of being able to focus on the content of what someone is saying, like the reason someone is saying something or what they're trying to do in a conversation, it's more a focus on the exact words and what the words mean or how they're saying it. And either way, both people take the other person personally and feel like, God, they have all these issues. Wow, if they could just change, then this problem would go away. So, long story short, there's just little like connection, there's little fluidity and joy. It's just uh an avoision. That sounds like it should be a word, right? Avoision. Maybe not. A lot of avoidance of conflict is what happens. Before I go into this episode, I wanted to invite you to imagine that you are and your partner are in like a glass display, like a window at a store. And just imagine everybody's watching your interactions with your partner, your possibly your fights with one another. And I just want you to observe like what you guys look like together on an average day. And the reason I want you to do that and do this periodically is close to 90% of all communication is nonverbal. Literally. Even if you're like, if you or your partner is on the spectrum or you are more verbal or your love language is something else, like we take in so much more information from one another non-verbally. So if you are noticing in this little window display that there is no obvious expressions of love, no gestures of love, no affection being communicated on a nonverbal level, I would call this just step one. This is like my very first primitive assignment slash experiment for you to try. This sounds really obvious and weird, but like if you just as frequently as is comfortable, start to inject nonverbal affection into your relationship, that can be a pretty effective and quick solve to a lot of the like dry kindling or friction of a relationship. And that is because affection is what tells the other person, hey, I like you. And hey, I think of you. And you are a priority in my life. And I'm here to be connected to you in a positive way. Like all of these really, really basic things that you think about, if you're an animal on a, or a human on a plane and you're squinting at someone from afar, it's like, are you friend or foe? All of that is taken in as like, friend. So that's what I want you to just try and see how it changes your rapport. It's like we need a little bit of glue, we need a little bit of grease for those gears of love to turn, of exchanging positive interactions. And if no grease exists, it's like we got to start it somewhere. Otherwise, we are 100% relying on verbal communication for our feeling of closeness, our feeling of affection, of like, this person actually likes me and enjoys my company. And if you don't like that person and enjoy their company, I'm guessing because you have zero positive interactions. This is just one way to like start adding to the love bank, just making deposits. I know that can be challenging if you're like, but they suck and I don't like them. You got to start somewhere. And I think in adult life, the shitstorm of responsibilities and of stuff you got to do, especially if you have kids, that can just dominate your ability to feel affection towards somebody. So it's like, this is for the good of both of you. I'm not placing blame on either of you because, like, it's really, really fucking hard to be a grown up with a ton of responsibilities. So I think a lot of issues with the relationships are a result of the actual practical aspects of functioning in modern day society and all the pressures that culture puts on us to do 1,000 more things than we actually should in any given day. So in other words, like all of the to-do list items take up the majority of the airtime of your exchanges. And like when we are in that situation, it just feels like, huh, I guess we're kind of friends, but do I even like this person anymore? I don't even know. So, if you're like, all right, I'm going to try this assignment, what does that even look like in practical terms? Positive, nonverbal communication would be stuff like little gestures, a smile when they walk in the door, a pat, a compliment, touch, and like, little pets here and there, a squeeze here and there, real subtle, start small. And past that, um, I think as tiny casual insertions of positive compliments into communication wherever it fits. Oh, I like that sweater. Oh, you are so good at that. Oh, that's such a you thing to do because you're always really good at blank. If we can just try this for like a week, just do it as an experiment, see what happens. I think that is how someone feels like they have enough to give back. Um, and yes, there are all sorts of unique situations where maybe they don't. But anyway, wanted to throw that out there before I go into the episode. And with that, here is the episode. There's a what, why, and how, the tools. First, part one, the what. I'm going to call it just exactly what I called it before, which is a UN situation in that everyone is trying to maintain peace, communication with like very, very basic terms, keeping distance, try not to provoke an explosion. And maybe if you are in a situation like this, when an explosion happens, you go DEFCON immediately, and you can't believe that it happened. And I'm guessing that the conversations are initiated by one person saying something very well planned, and um, you probably something to the effect of like, can you be more kind, or can you do this one thing differently? And something that feels like it's totally practical, and then something flips, and there's somehow it catalyzes an explosion where everybody's living in their unmet needs. And instead of it being about the original person, maybe it's about the asker. And then that asker feels hurt and they feel invisible. And this is a generic example, but the net of a relationship that is like a dry bed of kindling is similar to uh like a Rube Goldberg machine of I have an unmet need. No, you can't because I'm trying all these things. But can't you even hear me? But can't you even hear me? But can't you even hear me? It catalyzes another unmet need in another person or another fear in another person, which catalyzes the original fear in the first person. So it's a giant loop. And when somebody feels like they haven't been received and they feel invisible, it makes them feel so dire and so upset and hurt. And all of these things trigger in the other person a similar sequence. So on both sides, it's so much bigger because of the lack of ability to land or get anywhere. The sequence is what creates such a heightened felt sense of desperation. And therefore, both people end up feeling like, I guess I'll just have to never talk about this thing ever again, or I'll just have to swallow it. One person will feel like I've got to swallow it, or both people will feel like I have to swallow it, or maybe one person will take the blame for the entire problem and say, I just have to fix myself. Which brings me to part two, the why. I think that it can be a bajillion different things. And I think that the number one reason that things feel impossible and feel like there's no solution is that dry kindling. Like, let's go back to the window display. If you are both acting as if you don't like each other that much and you're not investing time and energy, and if you're not able to spend time and energy in a relaxed state with one another, there's no flow, despite your feelings about one another, despite like your actual motives, the the conditions of how you're both behaving are the sum of what you get out of the relationship. So it becomes like a pattern that is it results in the net sum of what your relationship is. And so even if there are communication issues, even if there are um, misfires happening between both people, an easy point to start at is giving these gears of love grease. And by that, I mean um, starting the process of just actualizing your truest motive, which is to give, to feed the other person, to fill the other person's cup, and catalyze more gift giving, reciprocal gift giving. And if you're thinking, well, this person is not fun, this person is not nice, they put me on eggshells, I want to just explore possible whys for what's happening with that person. That person might be unhappy on the inside. I think a lot of people who have anger and discontent in their system, like they are just living in a state of discontent, sometimes for that person, there are not a lot of solutions. And therefore, the only way to cope with this state is to try your best to suffocate it and redirect it, and oftentimes point to plausible external things that could validate the feelings or give a reason for why they're acting the way they're acting. And so a lot of the motivation to push people who come close away will be to like just validate, rationalize to the other person, like why they're acting the way they're acting. So if you don't know why you're unhappy, you don't know why you're angry, like if somebody's like, hey, what's wrong? You'd be like, it's this thing. Like you don't want to, you're trying to protect someone from coming into you and like deflecting as best you can. It's like a self-protective mechanism. And so an inability to be sweet or inviting, if that's if that describes your partner, you can trace that back to their internal state. If they are offensive, it is just emanating from inside of them. It's a direct projection of how they feel inside. So that might be volatile, that might be discontented, that might be just barren, like I have nothing to give. Don't take it personally. That is how they feel inside. And if that is how you feel, know that it sucks for other people, but it also sucks for you. Like it sucks to have that feeling inside. And if you are trying to reject it and cope with it and manage it and suppress it, I know that I've been there. And it's like sitting in an inconvenient truth. You're trying to manage it as best you can, but it's just not a joyful way to live. Outside of hormonal issues, I think a lot of the time we get to this state often by stretching ourselves too thin. And that harsh judgment outwards applies inwards as well. So I'm going to throw it out there. Maybe you have an overly militant bar for yourself. And if you can imagine a life that's lived that way where you are overscheduled and you're overly strict and you're overly stringent and you're overly exhausted, yes, you might be getting all of the things done, but that means that you, little baby you living inside of your being, does not get to enjoy their life experience. And when we do that to ourselves, when we do things at the cost of ourselves, what happens is we develop low self-worth because we feel we are not good enough to deserve a happy, enjoyable life with activities and room for ourselves to rest and room for ourselves to be creative and play and have fun and just feel joy. So what I'm saying is, if that sounds true for you, you owe it to yourself and your loved ones to treat yourself as if you matter in this life equation that is your schedule. You need some space for joy. You need to think about first things first, how do I make space for myself to have joy? My second example of a person who is harsh or rigid or critical, um, you might be thinking, I'm the person in the relationship that is to blame. I'm the person that's got to go fix myself. I'm the person that's the problem. My partner's unhappy with me. And maybe that's true. Maybe you do have a bunch of issues. Maybe you have a hard time functioning lately. Either way, if you're the one where all of the problems are on you, that's what I would call like being the identified patient. Like a lot of the time kids are identified patients in situations like this because they're the ones that are venting the emotions for everyone else in the family system. And what that means is like there are problems in both people. Like both people are part of the problem, but one person is the one that is focused on and is acting out based on the issues. And oftentimes it's the kid because the parents are like, they have a lot of unspoken problems. And then the kid is the one that acts out all of the issues for the whole family. And they're the ones that have to go to therapy. They're the ones who are fucked up. It's usually also the person who's the truth speaker who becomes the quote identified patient. By identified patient, I mean the person who's supposed to go get help and is sent to therapy or is having all sorts of issues in their body and their ability to cope with the relationship, the family system, the situation. Net net, I will say if you are the person who is being blamed for everything, I'm going to say it's likely not all about you being messed up. Everyone plays a role in the imbalances or overcompensations within a relationship system. If you are a partner in a relationship like this, where the issues cannot be talked about for fear of setting off an explosion, I just want to level with you because, like, we should always be able to talk about problems. We should always have access to working on those problems. We should always be able to work on something in therapy with somebody. And if you are not allowed to have that, I just want to ask you, like, is then the goal for you to just swallow it? Is your assignment then to just grin and bear it and deal with it and accept it? If so, are you going to do that forever? Like, are you accepting that that is the way it's going to be forever? If you do, if that is what you want to do, that's fine. That's okay for you to do. I will just call out. It's not an easy life, but I know a lot of people do choose that, like just to deal and then find joy in the other areas of their life, and they accept that distance and they just work around it. However, if that is not your plan, then here's what I would invite you to do is just recognize this situation for what it is, like that this communication sequence is causing us a lot of pain and it's not what it's about. What it's about is not what it's about. This cycle of triggering one another is it feels so overwhelming and it feels so paralyzing because it's like you might try all the tools and nothing works. That's just because you haven't had the right tools presented to you, and or that person does not have, or both people do not have enough grease for their love gears, I would say. So these are just going to be some tools I would invite you to start to practice in the hopes of giving yourself a little bit more flow, a little bit more trust, a little bit more faith in the positive intentions of one another as you move forward in the coming weeks and months. So, with that, here is part 3, the how, the tools. But first, a brief word from our sponsors. All right, the first tool I'm calling Emo Lingo Translator. So, in the sequence of miscommunication fires, I I know that the content of the conversation will be super specific. It'll be you said this thing and the way you said that thing is wrong, or I was talking about this other thing and you brought up the other thing, whatever it is. The next time that happens, I want to ask you to ask yourself, what is below that communication? What's the feeling that exists below that communication? And I know that's hard to think about, to step outside of when you are the one who's been triggered and you are the one who feels hurt. But below every communication is some sort of feeling that when you can tap into it, it opens up wiggle room, and in your body it will open up a sense of empathy. It's like things no longer become attacks. They become pretty like human and somehow basic and childlike and more approachable. So for example, your partner might say something like, I feel like a stranger in the house, or it's like you don't even know me, something like that. Whatever comments are, I invite you to get your journal. Whatever the comments are, just jot down a list of them and whatever the series of corrections you get, and then kind of squint at it and look at what is the feeling that rests below it. Like, what is the felt sense that person has? What is the fear that they have that's embedded inside of that comment? A few common ones are things like, can I trust you to make me important? Am I still important? Am I off your radar? Like, oftentimes people feel that they're not honored because they don't feel like they get enough attention. Like they don't feel special. It's like a baby. If you're not smiling at that person ever, they might feel like they are not treasured anymore. They also might be saying they feel powerless. So if like a person is rejecting your instructions or you asking them to do something, their rejection might be something along the lines of like, you can't tell me what to do. You're not the boss of me. And that underlying feeling is I feel powerless. I feel like I don't get any equal treatment in the relationship. I feel like you have all of the cards and I have none. And it's really easy to be dismissive to that feeling in other people by accident if you are the person who has all of the power in the relationship in a literal sense. So if you're noticing anything like that in your partner and like in the communications, if that's the underlying feeling, just that's an invitation for us to be very sensitive in areas like that and fill their cup in little tiny ways. Things like saying thank you and being kind and attentive, thoughtful gestures. If you're like overwhelmed in adult life, it's really easy to not have any time to do any thoughtful gestures, but like one a day, one every couple of days goes a long way. So, next time you get into an argument, ask, what are we really discussing? What's the feeling underneath all of this conflict conversation? And the more we can recognize the real motive, the more we can, instead of being on in the defense of like, I'm not going to take this shit, we can come into a place of softness and be more aware of how we can offset whatever that fear or unmet need is in our partner. All right. The next tool is called uh, the long game charting. So when we are, I know if you have any really toxic relationship, it's really hard to think about tolerating it. And I feel like a lot of the time we spend a lot of energy just in our minds debating if we are going to stay in a relationship. Like if we're unhappy, if it is, a lot of arguing, if there's a lot of arguing going on, if the person is not nice to us, if we're pretty like discontented for the most part, I wanted to invite you. This is a weird one. First of all, big caveat. If you are in an abusive relationship, never stay in abusive. I'm not condoning that in any shape or form. Exit it carefully. Google domestic violence help. Follow the steps of a safety plan. That is not what I'm talking about in this situation. I'm talking about like where both people have power and safety. If you're in a long relationship and you are not sure if it's a good relationship, I think one of the most painful aspects of that is just being in a constant state of, am I going to break up with this person? Am I going to move out of this relationship? And we can spend a lot of time fixating on how much we don't like the relationship. Like it becomes like kind of a dominant part of our day, dominant part of our thinking. And this is a weird idea, but I wanted to invite you to examine instead of spending all that time and energy talking about this thing, thinking about how much you dislike it, instead just trust your body and what your body's actions are as your truest decision of where you are in the relationship and what you are willing to do today, right now. I think a lot of the time we get so upset at ourselves for not leaving a relationship, or we feel like, why am I staying in this? I'm so stupid. This is so bad. Why am I doing this? It's like we'll have a mental debate and think about why we're tolerating the bad relationship, why the relationship is so terrible, why it's haunting us and why we're trapped and all of that. I think all of this thinking about the relationship is way more painful than just if we are choosing with our actions to be in the relationship, we just are in it. And that's what we are choosing with our actions. If we only had that part of the pain, it'd be way more tolerable than all of the mental narration. And my point is, this is kind of like this cloud of the second arrow of judgment in that it's unnecessary. All of the thinking about why I'm not leaving and why am I stuck and what, get rid of that stuff. That part is not helping anybody. And it also is a fight with what is. Whenever we're fighting ourselves on what is, we're just causing ourselves unnecessary pain. So, outside of that, if you're in a shitty relationship, the only thing you have to do is start working on yourself. Start strengthening yourself, start getting your confidence up, go to therapy for support, work on how you can feel more capable, more connected to other people, improve all of your resources as an individual, but get rid of all the judgment in your thought process about why you're not leaving the situation, why you're stupid for staying in it, how bad it is, and know that when you are ready to leave, and it is something that all of you has chosen, you will leave it. You will watch your own behavior for cues on how ready you are. It's a weird thing, but like you'll watch yourself taking steps. Like you'll watch yourself finding an apartment. You'll watch yourself changing your account info. You'll watch yourself taking actual practical steps, but it'll almost come from a deeper, more resolute part of you. It's not as much in this thinking, chattering part of your brain. I don't know if that made any sense. Hope it did. Hope it helps. All right, next tool, share the reality. This is a little bit of a risky one, but I wanted to put it in here. A lot of the time with couples, if you are in a shitty situation, you're both fighting a lot, you're very distant, having a shared reality can be intensely healing and give you more closeness than if you didn't talk about anything at all. And I know like when there is no solution, it feels like, well, we can't talk about it. What are we going to do? Like there's nothing to do from here. But if you can disclose how you feel about a problem, if you can talk about it in a completely neutral, non-offensive way, and ensure that you are coming from a place that is only talking about yourself, talking about where you're struggling, not placing blame, coming from a completely neutral energy with the goal of being loving, compassionate, communicative, that can give you almost like pop zit on the issue in that it gives you air. It'll bring new air and respect into the relationship room. So, wanted to throw it out there because when both people are secretly feeling a certain way and they don't talk about it, it just means like you're living alone in a lie you're living alone in this reality. And when you can share that reality, there's somewhere to move from there. You can problem solve. You can talk about your pain together. It's a weird version of being closer. All right. The next tool is called the overflowing cup. So in this in this dry kindling, we're both like pulling. We have nothing to give. There's no grease. So when you can create a little bit of grease or like slacken that rope that is too tight, you create more material for things to change. It's like there's more ability for both people to change, for both people to grow. And I know it's hard to do this, especially if you have a lot of unmet needs. But as an experiment, I want you to imagine with your partner that you have an overflowing cup. And what by that I mean, I have everything to give. I need nothing from you. My job as your partner is only to give gifts. It's only to fill your cup. It's not to make you feel guilty for not helping me. It's not to voice all the things I'm doing right. It's just to fill your cup. And if you don't feel like you have that ability, if it's like, I'm already pissed, I'm already exhausted, I've tried for too long and I'm not going to try anymore, then I would say just start with the small nonverbal gestures. But if you can reframe your mind toward this, I think about like, my grandparents, for example, they treated each other like that with such reverence and like unending love. Like, I will give forever if you take forever. That was the way they treated one another. And I was like, holy shit, that is kind. Like, what a incredible relationship to be in. How good would that feel? And then I realized, like, if you're one person in that role, like let's say just like I took one of them out and I put somebody else that's in a shitty relationship into that relationship, I think that eventually the other person would be healed by that unconditional love. You know what I mean? It's like living in a community where everyone is peaceful. It's like it's contagious. So just wanted to throw that out there as just a food for thought. All right. And then the next tool is called Nothing Left to Give. If you are a person that feels like they have nothing left to give, that you're just like muscling through the insane to-do list that is your life. I just wanted to invite you to create a little bit of wiggle room in your belief system. And I think because there's this like unrealistic standard in culture that is kind of like normalized through social channels. It's like we all see these examples of like all the shit you're supposed to buy, all the practices you're supposed to have, all of the sports you're supposed to play, all the classes you're supposed to take, there's all of these things that we're supposed to do and we're supposed to have, and the way we're supposed to look and the things we're supposed to do in a day. And those all change with the times. Every generation, every era has its own set of those things. If you've watched the Martha Stewart documentary on Netflix, I was just like marveling at the set of the to-do list of the 90s. Like, oh, interesting. So those would be the things that I would supposed to if I was like a mom in that time, I would be demanded to execute. Like all of these things are pressures that we feel at a certain point. And if that set of things right now for you is making you chronically cranky, I want you to look at that first. That being a person that you don't like is a bigger priority than checking all of these 500 boxes. I want to invite you to choose to prioritize your feelings of peace, freedom, enjoyment, space over the to-do list of culture. If there's one tweak you could make in this area, for example, cross half of your to-do items off of your holiday schedule. Imagine that. If you had to do that, I want you to remove half of them. What would that look like? What time would that open up? How would you feel? Would it be different? Would you have like more energy? Would you have more creativity, play, all of that stuff? Food for thought. And those are my tools. I hope they're helpful. Before I close, I wanted to say thank you to one of my latest sponsors, Typhon. I think that's how you say your name. Thank you so much for your donation. Very appreciated. Anyone who has the means to make a donation, you can head to yaywithme.com or visit me on Patreon. And if you don't have the means, I totally understand. If you could share this with someone it could help, that helps me as well. So, in closing, love is a choice and closeness is a choice. And we are constantly coming around to another person's side and making an effort to demonstrate to them our willingness to connect. And sometimes that feels really, really fucking hard. But love and relationships is a long game, like a super long game. I didn't realize how long of a game it is. And I mean, like decades, you know? If you can think in terms of what's my end goal for that, a lot of that will be deciding I am willing to read the script that you need to hear. I am willing to play the role in this play that you need me to play. And I know that is just for you and it is not at all for me. So give up the grease unconditionally. See how that changes your balance. See how it at least improves conditions and makes it less volatile. And just I'm not at all normalizing harsh and hurtful treatment. Do not tolerate harsh and hurtful treatment. Protect yourself, love yourself. But if you are dealing with somebody who is inflexible and you see no solutions, focus on you. How can I improve myself, love myself, recondition myself toward being happy and have an overflowing cup? And I send you my love and don't forget to smile.